I'm Paul Pouliot, the Sagamore for the Cowasuck Band of the Pennacook-Abenaki People, and I'm located in Alton, New Hampshire.
Hi, and I'm Denise Pouliot, the Sagamo Squaw head female speaker of the Cowasuck Band. And we have participated in this film because we see the dire need to restore the Great Bay Estuary.
Hi, thanks, Catherine, and so great to be a part of this. So I'm Reverend Zach Harmon. I'm the vicar at St. Christopher's Episcopal Church in Hampstead, and also a member of the Reconciliation Committee for the Episcopal Church of New Hampshire, and very, very excited to be a part of this project.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Nathan Furey. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm a fish biology expert and do a lot of research on migratory fish. So I was really excited to be a part of this project to simply do some fact checking and share some resources on river herring.
Thank you, Nathan. And yes, for those who didn't hear my quick introduction at the beginning, I'm Catherine Stewart. I use the pronoun she, her, and I am a theatre maker and filmmaker living in Fort Smith, New Hampshire. I'm also a co-conspirator, part of Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective, and I am the proud collaborator on this film, Swimming Upstream. What I'd love to do first off is maybe come to you, Denise and Paul, and ask, how did this partnership and this film come about?
So this film, boy, where do we even begin?
Well, it did start somewhat with Zach, because we've been working with Zach on environmental and social justice issues, and we're quite aware of the fact that the Episcopal Church here in New Hampshire has a concern. They call it the earth care, and we saw an opportunity where the Great Bay Estuary is a highly sensitive area that we should be protecting. So this came to be as a collaborative between the Episcopal Church, some of our INHCC, our Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective people, and us as tribal people, the Cowasuck Band. So we saw an intersection where we could all do good.
Yep. Summed it up pretty good.
Yep.
Yeah, and so Zach, I'll come to you, and if you'd like to share a little bit more about your work at the Episcopal Church, and then and perhaps earth care in particular is a term that some people might not be familiar with.
Yeah, earth care or creation care, we call it by both. So yeah, a little bit of background. So the Episcopal Church, we're like the American cousin to the Church of England. So all of that doctrine of discovery, colonial history, that's all a part of our background, unfortunately, but it's something we have to own and address. And in 2008, the Episcopal Church renounced the doctrine of discovery, which the film talked about here. And now we've been wrestling with what does that mean? And we're broken up into little dioceses, and I'm in the New Hampshire diocese, and started serving here in 2018 or 2017, and got to know Paul and Denise, reached out to them to talk about the doctrine of discovery, and have been building a relationship with them. And we're not the only church that's renounced it. The UCC church has, the ELCA branch of Lutherans, Unitarians have renounced the doctrine of discovery. So it's a growing movement to do this. And one of the things that in our language we talked about was building a relationship with the Indigenous people on the land which we've become settler or colonial settlers on, and to try to own that and be in relationship and start to work on things of solidarity like this. And with that, talking with Paul and Denise, they talked about the Great Bay as something that was important. And growing up in Alaska myself personally, I saw what it can be like in a place where you don't have dams and have fish flowing or like running. It's just amazing. And so when we're talking about the millions of river herring flowing, I can just see like, oh man, that would have been awesome to see. And so that's how we became involved, and we. Both the Reconciliation Committee, which I'm on, which works on racial justice and social justice, and the Creation Care Committee decided to work together on this. Normally we're kind of colonial and we separate them. Creation care is one thing, social justice is another, and this film really brought them together, and Paul and Denise helped us do that and launch a whole conversation that's changing our diocese as we have to think about that. So thank you. Hopefully that's a helpful answer.
Yes, thank you, Zach and Denise and Paul before that as well. We have some questions coming in, and we'll get to those in just a moment, and both in the chat and the Q&A function. But I did also want to kind of ask in this moment, both of you, Zach and Paul and Denise, why do you feel that a film is perhaps a good way to explore your relationship to one another and to have the kind of community conversations that you would like to be having? Is there something particular about the medium, or is there something about these kind of gatherings that help us explore the work in a particular way? That's the filmmaker partly asking that, but so because I have my answers and my reasons. But yeah, Denise, why is making a film so important?
For us, it was the accessibility. So it's important to have community events where we can gather and have open discussions about what can benefit all of us, but not everybody can always make those events. So, so we give lectures all the time, and we're constantly being asked to record them and to have them available. So we thought we would do a lecture just in a different way. And this is how we came upon, creating this film. But we enjoyed we like having the film because, once again, it's all about accessibility. It's about allowing people to see it when they have the time to see it. And even this Q&A panel will have this available for when they're able to sit and, spend the time and listen to what we're saying. So,
well, it's also another thing, a lot of things related to dam removals or such things of restoration of rivers becomes kind of like a subject in town conversations that always relate back to money. How much is it going to cost us? How much are we going to save? And you don't really flesh out the whole discussion. You don't understand the reality is it impacts more than just your pocketbook. It's the quality of life, the quality of the environment around you. It's a very complex discussion. And sometimes when you go to these public hearings and you listen to a lot of scientific reports, you kind of get washed away with numbers and facts. When you see it more in a visual sense, you kind of relate to the fact that this could be a whole different environment we live in if we took dams out and allowed the fish to, return to the rivers and waterways. So it's just, you have to imagine what the future would be like if things were restored back to the way they were before colonial contact.
Right. And we didn't even address all the issues within the Oyster River. How about the oysters? We didn't even address the oysters within the film. So there are so many aspects within that whole ecosystem that need to be preserved. We just felt, that film was the best way to understand where we're coming from in a more, accessible way.
In this video covers a broader range of age groups for understanding what's going on. This could be shown to family groups, and it was important that we address this on a family level and not just at an academic level.
So I'm going to turn to one of the questions we have coming to us from Catherine Slayton, and she's directed this question to you, Paul and Denise, but I do also wonder if after you've spoken, if Nathan, you have a perspective on this too. She asks, when we advocate for dam removal, what would you like us to make sure people know? So I guess that's really back to that when we're having community conversations, whether it's about the dam in Durham or other dams across the country. What is from your perspective, Paul and Denise? What would you like people to know? And then Nathan, we'll come to you after that.
All right. It's more than about myself. And you insert your own name here when I say the word myself. So we have to understand the ripple that we make in life. So each one of us, is a stone in the water, and we all make a ripple for every action we make. There's a reaction, and this dam is one of those actions that we've done, and it's created a ripple, and that ripple is depleting the fish, it's depleting the ecosystem, the list goes on. So it's about understanding our ripple and the effects of that ripple. That's the 7 generations that we talk about in the Indigenous community, how we do things today to preserve and protect the 7 generations to come. So it's not about us here and now. And I understand today's society is kind of all about me, meaning of the us here and now. But in our Indigenous community, we don't think about the me, we think about the them, and the them is the future generations.
Nathan, do you have anything you'd like to add kind of to that question of when talking to people about dam removal, what do people really need to know?
For sure, and I love Denise's answer, but I'll come from it from a very different perspective as a fish biologist and as an ecologist, and just simply that rivers are meant to flow. And that estuaries are meant to flow as well. And it's meant to be this constant slosh back and forth, this dynamic nature between freshwater and saltwater. And no matter how small of a river it might seem to be, that connection is still really important. And those dynamics are really important to stuff that's going on in the river, as well as what's going on in the estuary, and even what's going on in our coastal oceans as well. So I see a lot of information going back and forth and trying to get into really specific contexts and whatnot, but it's quite overwhelmingly clear that dams have deleterious effects on ecosystems, and that when we do remove dams in general, we see positive results at varying timescales.
And I'm going to come to another question that relates to this, particularly about the issue that's happening in Durham at the Mill Pond Dam right now. And Nathan, perhaps you can answer this initially. Pam Mueller asks, how does this presentation align with the dam controversy in Durham? As a new Durham resident, I'm being bombarded with so much confusing information. If you were to look at this film, Nathan, and your work in particular, what would you say is the singular most pertinent piece of information that you think relates to what we should be doing to dams?
Definitely, and again, I'm only speaking on this issue and really that view as an ecologist. Although certainly personally, I feel that we have a duty to remove these dams to kind of help promote and preserve kind of the previous uses of this land. But again, in terms of the Mill Pond Dam and such, it's quite clear. If you go through the reports, if you go through kind of the analyses done by our state agencies, by any federal agencies, by folks who've come in to look at the impacts of this dam on the local ecosystem, its removal will be a positive for migratory fish. Quite clearly. And this film is focused on river herring, and those populations have been in decline all throughout the Northeast, but also in New Hampshire, and in particularly on the Oyster River as well. And we can certainly get into the specifics of that, but I don't want to take up too much time being really focused on fish. But I'll just say there's a reason why every single agency who's responsible for the management of fish, and every single environmental group that's responsible for the conservation of natural resources have proposed that removing this dam is a good idea. And it's because the science is quite clear on that.
And I've just noticed that Svetlana has kind of upvoted a question that we have from Nancy Lambert, and it's just on this topic as well. So I'm going to keep us here for just a moment longer. She says and asks, people who resist removing the dam express concern about what they consider toxic sediments that have built up behind the dam, and suggest that releasing that sediment could cause environmental harm downstream in the Great Bay Estuary. They say that keeping the dam is more environmentally sound decision. Can Nathan's or others respond to that concern? Is there a concern here with this toxic sediment buildup and the release of that if the dam were to be removed, from your perspective?
Yes, and so this is getting a little bit outside of my expertise. I am a fish biologist. This really gets into kind of hydrology and sedimentation. And so absolutely, when you build a dam, one of the impacts, and this was mentioned in the film, is that you have sedimentation. You slow that water down. That water doesn't have the energy to carry sediments, and so sediments start to fall out of the water and start to build along the stream bed. And this has acted to make the Mill Pond Dam shallower and shallower. And some of those sediments are indeed not good ones, not ones that we want to be exposed to in great quantities. However, when you remove a dam, this is going to be a consideration for any dam removal. And this is where you need to have engineering teams that try to go through, figure out what type of sediments are there and how much, and how will they be released based upon how you bring down that dam and how you start to restore those channels. And again, there's a lot of information that's been done by New Hampshire Department of New Hampshire DES to look at this, as well as the contractors who have put forth how would they do this. And certainly there would be some of a release downstream, but everything I've read has made it seem like this isn't something that we need to be terribly concerned about, but that's also an individual level decision. So I don't want to necessarily say what's an acceptable amount, but you also have to consider the alternative. So then does this mean every single dam we just keep filling in with more and more of these sediments and then hope they stay still? At least when you remove a dam, you're going to have some control of that. If you, let's say, have a dam failure, you're not necessarily going to have control of where sediments go and such. So I'm hoping I'm not speaking too out of line. Again, this is beyond my expertise, but I have spent some time with some of the engineering reports and from some of the reports on this. And I do think there are resources that folks can go to read more on that.
Thank you. And I'll just take this moment. Thank you, Nathan, for stepping slightly outside of your expertise there, but also sharing some information that's really valuable to us. Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective, and in particular Jordan Spolka, has put together an education pack that works in relation to this film, Swimming Upstream, and the link will be available to that resource shortly in the chat, and then into your follow-up email after this panel and premiere presentation. So there will be a few more resources and other areas that you can go in search of that information, and more resources on the indigenousnh.com or website as well. I would love to come back to you, Reverend Zach, and ask you from your perspective, Patsy asks, what are the best ways that we as individuals living in New Hampshire can help protect the Great Bay Estuary? From your perspective as a community leader, what would you say? What are you doing when you consider the land around you in a broader context, knowing that you live and work broader than the area we're in just now? What's close to your heart and mind when you think about protecting the land and water and air around us?
Oh boy. Well, I think there's several aspects to that, and and the first is being a faith leader is the spiritual or meditation, kind of whatever speaks to you in your faith tradition, your perspective, but to be rooted and recognize that this is an important thing, and it's not to care for creation, to care for the environment. It's not something that's happenstance, but that it's deeply important, and that means studying, learning, and like I feel like I've learned a lot just in this discussion here happening around fish, and that's something important. And then also being engaged with people that and organizations that are doing this kind of work, like Paul and Denise, for instance, and the Cowasuck Band of Pennacook-Abenaki People, being engaged with universities and environmental programs, and trying to pay attention to what's happening, and just reading the history about what's happened to the land. I've been to some great presentations by Paul and Denise about the history of New Hampshire and what it was like, and kind of what we've done over time as European colonial white settlers. And so those are all important things, and to be engaged and active and discuss, and always open to learning, I think, because that's and being engaged. I think those are the big things that I see kind of in the big picture, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Zach. I want to take a moment and come back to you, Denise and Paul, and ask you, there's a question here in the chat that's asking about, John has approached the question of, in places where dams cannot be removed, are fish ladders being installed? And I want to kind of pull that question out a little bit further and look at some of the Indigenous waterways, the ways of collecting and gathering fish, fish weirs. That topic was brought up in the film. I'd love to kind of explore the way Indigenous individuals use weirs in the past in order to kind of speak about what's in the water now. What was in the water from your perspective?
Okay, so in a traditional sense, we used fish weirs. They were made out of either wood or of stone. And the purpose of the fish weir was to direct the fish to a single narrow point in the river where they could be easily netted or caught by hand.
On the other hand, the dams, people have drawn the analogy that our weirs were the same thing as dams. They weren't. Ours allowed the passage of fish to go through, and some of them were removable, like the stick ones could be removed. They were only temporary. So what we did was we more or less directed the fish to a point of easier catch, whereas a dam is across the river completely, and it blocks off the flow. Some species, and we have Nathan here will tell you, some species like the blueback are fast swimmers, and they're like middle stream type of fish, and they can go over rapids pretty well. But when it comes to, like jumping, it's only the salmon. Certain species can jump. Like a sturgeon couldn't jump, but it's a bottom-dwelling fish. So we've lost all our sturgeon in our waterways because of dams. They're just not the kind of fish that can go through the rapids. So we've lost one species right off the bat because of that. But when we look at the ladders, even the one at supposedly there's a fish trap and ladder at the Old Millbrook, but it just doesn't function. And when we saw Fish and Game there this last spring, throwing netfuls of bluebacks over the dam, you could see their frustration that the fish was still trying to spawn. And I think they pushed over like 2,000 one day and maybe 2,000 the previous day of fish. We realized that the dams, many of these small dams don't have ladders. They don't have any way of getting around them. They don't even have the rudimentary features. Several of the dams right in the same area of the Oyster River and the Lamprey have no means of getting around them, and these need to be corrected. If they're going to stay, they need to be corrected and made fish safe passage by.
But many of these dams don't need to stay.
So it's why spend the money to put a fish ladder around a dam that should be taken down, or it's already on a safety list to be removed by the Army Engineer Corps. Why do it? And I think that was the case in Exeter, where it became a matter of safety and economics.
Right.
And it happened so quick, and everybody was doing the same thing, wringing their hands and saying this is never going to work. And after 2 years, it's a perfect scenario. Everything's back to normal and everything's great. So
right, and the fish are already spawning back up the river there. So the dam removal was successful, and the ecosystem is returning. So
we take it 1 mile at a time, 2 miles at a time. Sometimes that's the best you can do.
You have to start at the mouth and move your way inward, and so we're starting at the mouth and we're moving. We've already began discussions having about removing dams and addressing dams further upstream. So those are already in, the works, but, we're focused on the estuary.
You got to start where it's closest to the estuary.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so thank you, Paul and Denise. So Nathan, I'd love to come to you for this point, because we've also had a couple of questions on this. Sarah Smith asks, are the fish still available to return upstream? Do the fish exist? And also, do they lose memory on how to return? Will they return? And then we also kind of other similar questions about that in terms of will the fish be able to come back if the dams are removed, and is it really important that the fish come back? I know I'm asking a fish guy this question, so I can guess what you're going to say, but yeah, will they come back, and is it really dam removal the best way to do that, rather than these other kind of mitigations like fish ladders?
Yeah, and first let me just kind of reiterate what Paul and Denise said. indigenous fishing weirs, even the semi-permanent stone ones, function in very different ways from the perspective of a fish, in terms of they did not cross the entire river. They did not create full impoundments. There was still flow both on the upstream side and downstream side. And certainly the wooden weirs were just completely different. Again, temporary, put in at certain times of year, and they're meant to funnel fish to increase the capture rate of fish. They are not meant to completely hold back water. They had very different purposes, and therefore they have very different consequences to what a fish experiences. And so absolutely, when you have a dam that goes across a river, one of the solutions is to provide a way for fish to get around it. And so these fishways or fish ladders are kind of the most common way to do it. In other systems, like if you go up north a little bit to the Saco, it's a very steep dam or very steep impoundment. And there you literally have a fish elevator where you put fish into a box and then you hydraulically lift it up 50 feet in the air and dump the fish on the other side. So there's a lot of engineering solutions that are possible, but none of them are going to be perfect, and none of them are going to be perfect for every species that would want to have this connection between the freshwater and the estuaries. And we've seen that, for example, a lot of the fishways out east were developed on designs of fishways that were used out west for Pacific salmon that are much larger and really strong swimmers relative to our migratory fishes that we have here out east. And so we just kind of learned that some of these fishways don't work. And even if some of these fish ladders work for river herring some of the time, and certainly we do, to answer Sarah's question, yes, we do get fish still going up these fish ladders, but it's certainly not as many as we'd like. And there's going to be a toll of that too. There's been a lot of research demonstrating that fish tend to get stressed out going through these things, whether it's through increased flow rates or whether it's increased temperatures, decreased dissolved oxygen. Depending upon the system and the stream, there can be some negative experiences by these fish that's going to stress them out and potentially make them less successful in spawning moving forward. So yes, removing the dams are really important here, because then you're not really limiting that flow or that connectivity. To speak to Paul's comment, we do have Atlantic sturgeon in Great Bay, but they're not able to get through these dams, for example, to get from the estuary into the freshwaters. While other species, like American eel, I think I saw somewhere that's, American eel are not doing well, and that's regardless of dams. So why do we care about dam removal? And absolutely, most American eels can get through the dams here of Great Bay relatively easy because they're good climbers. They're good in getting into little crevices and such. Where they tend to get hurt by dams, or if it's a hydropower and a turbine, and you put a long noodly looking fish through a turbine, and bad things will happen. But that doesn't mean that all species are able to get through these fishways. And the other aspect is, okay, well, once you're beyond that ladder, now you're in an impoundment versus a river or a stream, and that's going to have fundamentally different characteristics than a river that these fish evolved to be in. And feel free to cut me off at any point, Catherine, but I think there's one more question there, and that's should we care? Should we care about the fish? And obviously, as a fish biologist, I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to say yes even if you don't care about river herring, even if you had never heard of river herring when you watch this film today. River herring are what we call a forage fish. And what this means in ecology is that a whole lot of other things in the ocean ecosystems like to eat them. And so what this means is that even if we don't think river herring are very beautiful fish, which I won't take offense to, if we can improve their population sizes, they're going to be that connection from the land and the river to the estuary out to the coast. And it's actually going to help a lot of our species in coastal waters. There's been some wonderful modeling work done over the past several years that demonstrated if we could increase river herring populations through dam removals, we could bolster largely every other group of marine animal in the Gulf of Maine. And that includes some really important species, such as things like Atlantic herring, that are really important for the lobster industry because it's a main bait for the lobster industry. In the past few years, you may have even seen in the news that quotas of Atlantic herring have been reduced drastically because they're not doing well. And so providing another forage fish, because that's why Atlantic herring probably aren't doing well. A lot of things like to eat them. If we can provide more forage fish in the ocean, that's going to help relax the stress in all of these systems and help a lot of our fisheries offshore as well.
Thank you, Nathan. A great reminder of how we play a part in the larger ecosystem and how we are all connected. I want to come to you, Denise and Paul, and we will be wrapping up really shortly. I promise that we'll be done by 8:15 tonight, although I'm sure this conversation could go on longer and will continue to go on. But I see that Nancy Lambert has put a question in chat that it might be important to come to. It says, the Durham Historic Association issued a statement against dam removal that included the following statement. We in the DHA value our historic past and will continue to argue for the preservation of the Mill Pond Dam as a reflection of what has made us who we are. Nancy says, I would appreciate hearing the Pouliots' response to this statement. Is there any response that you'd like to make to that particular statement from the Durham Historic Association?
So my response is, I reflect back to the reason why the dam was built. All right, the dam was built, one, to block up the water to create a profit. So that's what you're preserving, is you're preserving, the financial, profit of the dam. But more importantly, when the dam was constructed, it stopped the flow of fish. And the colonial government knew that the stopping of the flowing of fish would starve the indigenous people. So by stopping the fish, today, you're not just starving us as indigenous, but you're starving yourselves as well. And you've changed the entire sustainability of this state, where we are no longer a sustainable state. So I ask the Historical Commission, what are you truly preserving? Because to me, it sounds like you're preserving oppression. You're preserving the demise of, proud people. And is that the legacy a historical commission wants to hold on their shoulders? Because I would like to think that as a historical commission, you would be thinking about the entire history of a region and not just the colonial oppressive history. Do you have any other comments?
Well, we did propose that there was, by record or some record, that there was a Fishwares or fishing location right there in that same vicinity.
Right, that was destroyed in order to build the dam.
So there was a small fall or something there that was possibly part of an indigenous fishware way back. And we have proven our presence there through archaeology. I'm not going to get into that, but we know that there was a deep presence on the Oyster River of our people. What I'd like to say is we'd like to reconstruct stone fishware and make it a reenacted or reconstructed feature so that people, when they get on that bridge, they could look down and see what an indigenous fishing wear looked like. All of the ones that are out there still in existence today are somewhat hard to actually see what a fishware really looks like. Some of them are underwater, some of them are in remote areas. We think this would be a great historical feature if in that small grassy area, looking down there, signage in an illustration of what a indigenous fishing wear was like on the Oyster River back in those days would be just as important as a reflection on the construction of some odd bridge or dam design that made up this particular dam. It's kind of a ridiculous comparison because one is deep, long, lasting, thousands of year history versus something that started in the 1600s. So you got to compare the two histories you're looking at. We'd rather look at the long-term history of the location and not just the shallow colonial industrialization time period.
But at the same time, we felt that this was a good compromise. The Historical Commission can relish in the commercialism of the proposal, since that's what they ultimately wanted to preserve based on their statements.
Thank you, Paul and Denise. We've had several questions about a relative success story in Exeter and the removal of the Great Dam. We've had several people saying that they enjoyed the fascinating process of watching the river bed change there and the dam be removed. But we also have questions, and as a member of the Exeter Conservation Commission, Alison said, I can tell you that the Great Dam in Exeter was removed in the fall, and we observed river herring upstream of the former dam the following spring. I see, Nathan, you're typing, but I also wondered if you can share with everyone, because there are several questions about did the fish come back? Did they come back well? What is it really a successful story from your perspective, Nathan? And then also maybe Paul and Denise, and then we'll almost be wrapping up as well after that point. So maybe just some quick thoughts on this.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll try to keep it brief and focused on some things that I've seen regarding information about, some folks are trying to say that it hasn't been a success and that numbers of river herring are actually lower than they were before the dam removal. But you have to recognize how we actually count fish as they go through a river and kind of the limitations that New Hampshire Fish and Game has to count those fish. So the one benefit, and I'll use air quotes here for benefit of a dam, is that it makes it easier to catch fish because they're forced to go through a narrow little fishway. And so this means that the fish probably aren't doing very well, but you're going to be able to count it as you go through. Then when you remove that dam, it becomes a lot harder to count those fish as they go upstream. And so, for example, what New Hampshire Fish and Game has to do now when they count fish going up the Exeter River is they have to do visual counts. And they're going down for a short amount of time, multiple times a day. It's what they can, it's what they can feasibly do. And they're counting those fish. But the chances are they're not going to be there right as there's a lot of fish going by at any given one time. So that's really, it's been a good thing, as Dr. Eberhardt put into the Q&A. Absolutely, we're seeing river herring further upstream than we have in a long, long time. And that is wonderful. We now have a new challenge of trying to actually count those fish and how many there are. However, in other systems where we've been able to deploy more resources and count fish, places like the Penobscot up in Maine, we've seen dramatic increases in the number of river herring and other migratory fish that come through after dam removal. Particularly river herring seem to respond quite quickly.
And Paul and Denise, was there anything you would like to add about your experience of the Exeter Dam or any of those other removals that have happened?
Well, we did a little study of the town of Exeter, and they used to have Eel Fest, American Eel Fest at one point, like it was a community thing where they would have these festivals for the fish. We heard rumors, and we can't substantiate it because I don't know who was going to organize it, but they were talking about having like herring festivals again.
Alewife.
Yeah,
we're discussing bringing back the Alewife Festival.
Yeah,
in Exeter.
So there are some social revitalization things going back to the past to do things like honoring the fish that they migrate and have some festivals about that, and maybe enjoy the aquatic life that's coming up the river. But I think it's always that emotional thing that it's hard to count fish when they're in the wild. And they don't have to do it in front of your gauge, and they don't have to do it on your ladder. When they're going at night, they're going all times of the day. And people say, "Oh, I didn't see anything." Well, it's all a matter of being at the right time. That's all.
I mean, it didn't happen.
And just like we were at the old Mill Dam and seeing 2,000 to 4,000 bluebacks thrown over the dam. You don't see that every day. You just have to be there at the right time. And then suddenly you realize the importance of getting the dam out of the way.
Right. And if they weren't there to net those fish over the
They're
dam,
gonna die.
They would have died in that hole. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said here.
Right.
Think about your ripple.
The ripple, that little pebble in the water.
Absolutely. And so just as we're wrapping up here, I'd love to hear from each of you. And we'll try and answer the last few bits and pieces in the chat and things like that. And I've got a roundup of where you can get more resources. But the last question kind of ties together a few different questions in the chat here and comes back to that ripple that you mentioned, Denise. And I'd love to maybe start with you, Zach, but on this one, and I'll go around each of you. We have a question here from Nathaniel Bourne in the Q&A that says, one of the ideas the film brought up was the relationship of reciprocity that the Indigenous people have with the land, water, and all creatures. How could that idea of reciprocity shed light on the conversation going on in Durham around dam removal? And I would love to expand that a little bit further to another question that has also been asked, which is kind of, whose responsibility is it to do this work and to do work like this? So that idea of responsibility and reciprocity to and with the land. Any final thoughts on that would be wonderful. And Zach, I'll come to you first, and Nathan next, and then we'll end with Paul and Denise.
Okay. Well, with reciprocity, I think sometimes in the Christian tradition, we end up with this idea that humanity is supposed to dominate and take over creation, unfortunately, and that can sometimes be a mistranslation, in my opinion, of what it says in the Bible from a theological perspective, because it also talks about guarding and caring for creation in the same light, that's something important to do. And I think of with reciprocity, if we're gonna take something or impact something in some way, then we have to have a way to give back, and that's something that we're charged to do. And so when we talk about something like a dam or something else we're doing that's affecting water quality and affecting fish, like that's an impact that we're taking and affecting. And what can we do to be good stewards, to be good carers of creation, or good carers of the earth, to put something back to make it right. And so I think that's always a good question to carry around with us.
Thank you, Zach. Nathan, from your perspective, this idea of, first there was a question about whose actual responsibility is it in terms of, like, state organizations. Is this, it can be so complex that people don't necessarily understand that, but from your perspective as well, if you're able to speak to that, where does reciprocity and responsibility come into your work?
Yeah, and I guess I'll focus on the responsibility side of things to be brief. But I think if this process, or if anything over the past 2 years, whether it's Mill Pond Dam, or if it's just anything going on in our society, or if we just look back on our own colonial history as well, is that the responsibility is with all of us, and it's particularly on those with a whole lot of privilege, like myself. We continually put, I think, the responsibility on those who are oppressed, and instead it's got to be every single one of us. It's very easy for something like the mill pond or a dam removal to put that on the responsibility of state agencies and town councilors and such, but we did. The town of Durham did do that, and in the end it's going to come down to a vote and come down to the power of the people. And each of us as individuals. I do not live in Durham. I live in Nottingham, but I still felt it was important to contribute in some way, because I have knowledge that hopefully helps in some small way. So I don't know if that answers your question fully, but I'll leave it at that.
Oh, it does. Thank you. And I think that we don't always have the answer. We're all just individuals exploring what it means to step up to this work and to do this work. And I appreciate you roaming around the ideas with us, expert or not, resident or Durham or not. We each have a responsibility. Paul and Denise, I'd love to come to you as we wrap up here to talk about Nathaniel's question, Nathan's question of reciprocity. How can we come together from your perspective? What would you say?
So I first want to say that removing the dam is a human responsibility. It's not an organizational responsibility. As much as we want to point fingers and blame one, group of people, it's a human responsibility at this stage. So it's just a matter for us all to make this determination and just do the work that needs to be done. But as far as I can't even say the word. It's getting too late for me. Thank you. Sorry, it's getting too late for me. So we have to take mercy on those that we damage. And so we have to recognize the problem that we have created, acknowledge the solution, and then put that into practice, and then allow the species and the environment to heal. You can't go in and think just removing the dam is going to resolve all the issues. It's going to take patience. It's going to take removal of invasive species. It's going to take nourishment of other species to move in. The other wildlife. It's not just about fish. It's about turtles and plants and trees and other birds and So
nature's got to heal itself. Yeah. It's like, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off, and there is going to be a wound there, but it's going to heal. And when it heals, it's going to be much stronger for the process. And, everybody is worried about the pollution, the impoundment area. These things all get resolved. I mean, the same issues were raised in Exeter, and all those things turned out to be just, I won't say it's fake news, but it was just noise. It was banter. And it was what if. The turn of this whole thing is every one of these dam removals that across the country have gone forward were always economically sound in what they did. It was never sound to rebuild an old dam that was going to have no purpose. Every one of them, there's thousands of them in New England, all in the same category. They're unsafe, they're all colonial, and they need to be removed. So with that, I'd like to make a pitch for our
right. Just do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
Think about beyond yourself. There are more than just us in the world. There's a whole species out, of creatures out there, and we all depend on each other. So what we do to them, we do to ourselves. If we kill them off, we kill ourselves off bit by bit. And so we need to recognize that, we all depend on each other.
And we only highlighted 2 species of fish. I mean, there's a lot more. It's a lot more complex than this.
We only had so much time.
Right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those answers and for all that we'll continue to explore. We've got several questions asking about this film. That you can use the same link that you clicked on earlier. It is now on the Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective's YouTube channel, and that link now stays available for anyone to watch free of charge. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.